This child has nothing to do with me. After you give birth, take it and get out of my sight." The voice was thunder, shattering the hushed sterility of the private maternity suite. The door slammed back against the wall, and in strode Jonathan Pierce, 50 years old, white, tall, broad-shouldered, every inch of him armored in a navy suit worth more than most annual salaries. His shoes clicked across the polished floor like gunshots, his jaw clenched with contempt. He had the look of a man used to bending rooms to his will, a man whose fortune could crush opposition before the first objection was raised. But here, in this quiet chamber, his authority faltered, because on the bed, frail and spent, sat Maria Bennett, 32, rail-thin from years of labor, her dark skin pale with exhaustion, her hospital gown loose at the shoulders. She was a maid by trade, a black woman whose presence in Jonathan's mansion had been barely acknowledged except when she scrubbed marble floors or polished glass. Now, cradling a newborn boy against her chest, she looked both broken and luminous, her hollow cheeks glowing with the fierce radiance of first-time motherhood. Maria's arms curled protectively around her infant. The tiny body pressed against her trembling chest. Sweat streaked her temples, her breath uneven, but her gaze was unyielding. The child squirmed softly, eyes still closed, unaware of the storm he had been born into. The midwife, Sister Agnes Morales, stepped forward with instinctive authority. In her 50s, stout and practiced, she had guided hundreds of lives into the world. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice a firm shield, "this is a hospital. Lower your voice. You'll frighten the baby." Jonathan's reply was a snarl. He jabbed his finger toward Maria. "She thinks she can trap me, a maid. Do you know who I am? Do you know the kind of empire at stake? And she dares." His voice cracked with rage. A nurse, Leah Park, slender and steady-handed, tried to intercept him. "Sir, please, let her recover. We can speak outside." But Jonathan brushed past her as if she were air. He loomed over the bed, casting a long shadow across Maria's pale blanket. His fingers stabbed toward her chest. "You are nothing but a servant. You imagine one night of weakness entitles you to my legacy? Pathetic." Maria flinched, but her grip on the child only tightened. Her lips quivered, yet when she spoke her words carried a surprising steadiness. "You can despise me all you want, but don't deny your own blood." Jonathan's laugh was bitter, hollow. With one swift movement he pulled a checkbook from his pocket. The pen scratched hard across the paper. He tore out a slip, folded, and flicked it onto the blanket. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." The crisp rectangle landed between mother and child like a verdict. $200,000. "Take it," he spat. "Disappear. If you breathe a word, I will bury you and that brat deeper than memory itself." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of medical equipment, the shallow breaths of the mother, and the muted cries of a newborn adjusting to air. Maria stared at the check. Her tears welled, slipped down her cheeks, but she did not reach for it. Instead, she pressed her lips to the crown of her son's head, whispering against his soft hair. Then she raised her eyes, shining with defiance. "I don't want your money. I want my child to live as a human being." The room seemed to shift, as though those words had pulled oxygen from the air. Even Leah, who had seen countless dramas unfold in sterile wards, felt her throat tighten. Jonathan opened his mouth to retort, but the sound died, because the infant stirred. Slowly, impossibly, his eyelids fluttered open, and there, in the fragile face of a newborn, appeared eyes unlike any in the room. Not blue, not brown, not green, but violet. Deep, crystalline, like shards of amethyst catching light. It was the unmistakable mark of the Pierce lineage. Generations of wealth had boasted of it. Magazines had called it their genetic signature, a rarity so pronounced it had become a family legend. It was said no one outside the bloodline bore it. Now, those eyes stared directly at Jonathan, tiny, uncomprehending, yet undeniable. The billionaire froze. His jaw slackened. For the first time in years, his posture broke. His chest heaved once, twice. The certainty he had worn like armor cracked, if only for an instant. The midwife glanced at the child, then back at him. Her face softened with the knowledge of truths no bribe could erase. Leah shifted uncomfortably, sensing history pressing into the room. Jonathan's hand twitched at his side. He took a step back, as though the gaze of his own blood was more than he could endure. His eyes darted to the check on the bed, then back to the violet stare that seemed to pierce straight through the layers of his pride. And then, without another word, he turned. His shoes struck hard against the tile. His hand yanked the door. The slam echoed down the corridor like a gavel striking judgment. Maria exhaled, a sob tangled with relief. She lowered her forehead to her son's, whispering promises no one else would hear. Sister Agnes adjusted the blanket, muttering prayers beneath her breath. Leah retrieved the check, her lips pressed tight, unsure whether to shred it or save it for evidence. The door remained shut. The storm had left, but the thunder lingered. For Maria, one truth settled in her bones. The fight had only begun. Maria Bennett had lived her whole life in the margins of wealth. At 32, she was wiry and tired, her body carrying the wear of endless labor. Orphaned young, she worked wherever she could, washing dishes, folding laundry, scrubbing stairwells. Eventually, she found employment at the Pierce estate, a mansion of marble and chandeliers, owned by one of the most ruthless billionaires in America. Jonathan Pierce, 50, tall and broad-shouldered, wore power like armor. His steel-gray hair was always immaculate, his navy suits hand-stitched in Italy. He was the sort of man who silenced rooms by walking into them. To him, Maria was invisible, just the help, until one night when champagne blurred his judgment and loneliness overpowered pride. The affair lasted only minutes, but its consequence stretched into eternity. Weeks later, Maria realized her nausea meant more than fatigue. She carried life inside her, and with it the possibility of belonging she had never known. Terrified but determined, she went to Jonathan. In his library, her hands shook as she whispered, "I'm carrying your child. Please give him a chance." Jonathan didn't blink. He reached for his checkbook, scribbled a figure with the carelessness of a man signing away a nuisance, and slid the paper toward her. "End it," he said coldly. "Take the money. No one needs to know." Maria pressed her palm to her stomach. The flutter within her was unmistakable. "This is not a mistake," she said, voice cracking. "This child is the reason I keep breathing. He will be my only family." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Then you are a fool. But understand me, I will not let this destroy me." From that day, his resistance became relentless. His lawyers visited first, delivering documents that promised comfort and silence. "Sign here," they urged. "You'll be compensated generously. It's better this way." Maria tore the papers in half. Next came Jonathan's personal physician, Dr. Callahan, a man in his 60s whose loyalty had been bought by years of retainer fees. He examined her, then left the room with Jonathan. Maria could hear Jonathan's voice through the thin wall. "Do it. Remove the problem." But Callahan emerged grim-faced. "It's too late," he said quietly. "The pregnancy is well advanced. Any termination now would risk her life. It would be inhumane." Jonathan's face blazed crimson. "You're telling me I'm trapped?" The doctor adjusted his spectacles. "You can pressure her. You can pay her. But medically, it cannot be undone. The child will be born." Jonathan's fist struck the desk so hard the pens rattled. "Then we'll deal with it afterward." Maria heard every word. She knew then that the battle had only begun. Jonathan escalated. Doctors of less integrity were summoned. Men who spoke in clinical detachment about late procedures. One even placed a pen in her hand, murmuring that he could resolve this quietly. Maria dropped the pen. "He already kicks inside me," she said. "He is alive. You will not take him." Jonathan tried intimidation next. A black sedan idled outside her building night after night. Men in tailored suits followed her to grocery stores, whispering warnings. "You are ruining yourself. And him. Do the right thing while you still can." She refused. And then came the headlines. Someone in Jonathan's circle leaked the story. Tabloids plastered her face beside his. "Maid claims billionaire's baby." "Gold digger with a mop." On talk shows, hosts laughed. Callers sneered. "Classic trap. She's after his fortune." Others dismissed her outright. Who would believe a maid over a mogul? Even neighbors turned cruel. At the laundromat, women muttered, "Why didn't she just take the money?" Former friends shook their heads. "Mariah, you've ruined yourself." She carried the weight of their scorn in silence. At night she lay awake in her rented apartment. The ceiling leaking, the radiator cold, her hand pressed against the swell of her stomach. She whispered to the child, "You are worth it. No one can erase you." Jonathan's lawyers returned with bigger numbers. First 50,000, then 200,000. Finally, $1 million delivered by a woman in a silk suit who set the check delicately on Mariah's kitchen table. "All you have to do," the woman said, "is sign adoption papers. The child disappears. You walk away with freedom." Mariah stared at the figure. It was more money than she could imagine, more than enough to buy safety. But she looked down at her swollen belly, felt the baby shift beneath her skin, and pushed the paper back. "I will not sell him," she said. The woman's eyes were cold. "Then you're condemning yourself." By the 8th month, Jonathan stopped pretending. "Fine," he told his aides. "Let her have it. Once it's born, we'll erase the problem." Maria's fear grew, but so did her resolve. She worked odd jobs when her body allowed it, mopping hospital floors, folding strangers' laundry while neighbors whispered. She taped her drafty windows shut against the winter wind. She hid from photographers crouched in alleys, and still, she whispered to her son, "You are not a mistake. You are the reason I rise each morning." When labor came, it was long and brutal. The hospital bed shook with her cries. Sweat soaked the thin sheets. Jonathan did not arrive with comfort. Instead, one final emissary came, carrying yet another check. "Last chance," he said. "Take this. Walk away. The child doesn't need to exist." Mariah screamed, not just from pain but defiance. "Get out," she shouted. "He is not yours to erase." Amid blood and agony, her son entered the world. Tiny, fragile, alive. She pressed him to her chest, sobbing with relief. They returned to her cramped apartment, a peeling room with a broken crib and a second-hand mattress. The tabloids still mocked. Neighbors still whispered. Jonathan still lurked in the shadows, planning his next move. But Mariah rocked her child through sleepless nights, whispering truths that no wealth could buy. "You don't need his name to have value," she murmured. "You don't need his empire. You need only your own worth. And I will teach you to carry it." Her voice shook, but her conviction did not. Jonathan Pierce had lost the first battle. The child had been born, living proof of the scandal he feared. But Mariah knew the war was far from over. For now, all she had was her pride, her labor, and the boy who was both her burden and her reason to survive. And that, she told herself in the quiet, was enough. By the time the boy reached his 5th year, the truth could no longer be hidden. His name was Isaiah Pierce, though in the neighborhood where he lived with his mother, he was simply known as Isaiah Johnson. The name Mariah chose to shield him. But no alias could mask what burned in his face. A pair of violet eyes, rare as cut amethyst, impossible to deny. In the Pierce family, those eyes were legend. Newspapers had once called them the dynasty's genetic seal, a marker as distinctive as a crest engraved in stone. Every portrait of the Pierce lineage, Jonathan as a child, his late father, even sepia photographs of forebears from a century earlier, showed that unmistakable gleam of purple light. It was the one feature that money could never fake. Mariah Johnson, slender and worn from years of scrubbing floors and balancing 2 jobs, had done everything to keep her son away from scandal's reach. She lived in a second-hand apartment with peeling paint, worked shifts at a laundromat, and refused to speak Jonathan Pierce's name. Yet she raised Isaiah with dignity. Every morning she whispered the same words as she straightened his small collar. "You don't need a father to have worth. You need only the truth of who you are." But truth has a way of finding light. It began innocently, when Isaiah's preschool teacher, Miss Ellen Garcia, posted a photograph online. She was a kind woman in her 40s, dark-haired, with a habit of celebrating her students' small joys. One afternoon, she snapped a candid picture of Isaiah by the classroom window, sunlight pouring over his face, his violet eyes lit as though from within. She captioned it simply, This little one has the most extraordinary eyes I've ever seen." Within hours, the post spread beyond the circle of parents. Strangers began to share it, marveling. By the next day, journalists had picked it up, and soon sharp-eyed readers drew comparisons. "Don't those look like Jonathan Pierce's eyes?" one headline read. Another tabloid went further. "Maid's child bears billionaire's mark." Jonathan Pierce was on the brink of finalizing a colossal merger with a Middle Eastern investment group, an acquisition that would cement his place as one of the world's most powerful financiers. The deal was valued at tens of billions, but more than the numbers was the image, stability, honor, legacy. His partners prized reputation almost as much as profit. Any scandal touching morality, family, or betrayal could make them walk away overnight. The photo of Isaiah threatened all of it. In the Pierce boardroom, Jonathan slammed the newspaper down, his face bloodless. "It's a trick of the light," he snapped. "That woman wants money again." But his advisors exchanged wary glances. They had seen those eyes before, in the family portraits lining the hall outside. Panic set in. Jonathan ordered his legal team to issue denials, flooding the press with statements. "The Pierce family has no connection to this child." He paid friendly journalists to write features about genetic oddities, about how rare mutations could appear by chance. He even staged photographs of himself beside distant cousins to blur the uniqueness of the trait. But truth resists erasure. The whispers only grew louder. Social media paired Isaiah's photograph beside childhood images of Jonathan. The resemblance undeniable. The same sharp chin, the same unusual eyes. Investors began to call the board, asking discreet but pointed questions. The Middle Eastern partners, known for their rigid view of honor and family, delayed their signatures, and every day, the photo of Isaiah spread further. Jonathan's fury deepened into obsession. He summoned Mariah's old landlord, her neighbors, anyone who might sell information. He dispatched lawyers to issue gag orders, private investigators to trail Mariah on her way to work. Still, she walked past them with her head high, Isaiah's small hand clasped in hers. Then one winter evening, Isaiah fell ill. What began as a fever turned into a sharp cough that would not quiet. Mariah rushed him to St. Gabriel's Hospital, the same private clinic where years earlier she had given birth. Word of the admission reached Jonathan almost immediately. His network of lawyers and fixers made sure of it, and for reasons he would never admit aloud, he went. On the surface, it was control, making sure no doctor, no nurse leaked a chart, a record, a DNA test. But beneath, a darker pull dragged at him, dread, the gnawing fear that blood had already bound him to the boy. He entered the hospital, not with the fury of 5 years earlier, but with a brittle, contained panic. His suit was pressed, his cufflinks gleaming, yet his hands trembled as he signed the visitor log. He told himself it was strategy, nothing more. Inside Isaiah's room, the air smelled of antiseptic and faint lavender from a candle Mariah had brought. Isaiah lay propped against white pillows, his small chest rising with uneven breaths. And then his eyes opened. Violet, unmistakable. Jonathan froze. For an instant he was staring into a mirror of his own childhood photographs. The same color, the same defiant spark. Only now, instead of pride, he felt stripped bare. Those eyes reflected back his life of wealth. Yes, but also his cowardice, the nights he'd hidden behind contracts, the mornings he'd signed checks to erase responsibility, the decades of running from anything that might tether him to vulnerability. Isaiah blinked slowly, studying him without fear. And in that gaze, Jonathan saw not just resemblance, but judgment, silent and piercing. Mariah stood beside the bed, her frame tired but unbowed. She had changed little in 5 years, still slender, still carrying the gravity of survival etched in the lines of her face. Yet her voice was steady, cutting through the sterile hush. "You can buy the press," she said coldly. "You can buy lawyers. You can even buy silence from people who should speak. But you cannot buy inheritance. You cannot buy what flows in his veins." Jonathan swallowed, but no retort came. He had rehearsed denials, practiced scorn, readied bribes. None of it mattered under the truth of those eyes. Maria stepped closer, her shadow falling across him. "You've spent years trying to bury what you feared, but every time he opens his eyes, the truth rises again. This She gestured to Isaiah, whose small hand curled around her wrist. "This is what you cannot erase." Silence thickened. The hum of the medical monitor filled the room, each beep like a metronome marking Jonathan's hesitation. Outside, reporters still speculated. Lawyers still drafted statements. Investors still whispered. But here, in this quiet room, the truth stood undeniable. Jonathan Pierce, master of mergers, architect of fortunes, could not bargain with blood, and for the first time in his life, he had no words. The pressure mounted like a vice closing around Jonathan Pierce. For weeks he had managed scandal the way he always had, with lawyers, with money, with silence. But this time, nothing held. The photograph of Isaiah's violet eyes still spread. The board of directors now whispered openly of replacement, and the Middle Eastern investors signaled they would not proceed until the matter was resolved. Reputation had always been Jonathan's shield. Now it had become the blade pressed to his throat. The demand was clear: speak or lose everything. So a press conference was called, global in scope, cameras streaming live to every network that had once praised him as an untouchable titan. Now those same cameras waited to record his fall. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel was packed wall to wall. Journalists crowded the aisles. Flashbulbs burst like lightning, and a low hum of voices filled the air. On the stage, a lectern stood empty under harsh white lights. For once, Jonathan was late. When he finally entered, the room seemed to draw a breath. He looked diminished. The perfect suits were still tailored, the ties still silk, but his face was pale, the lines around his mouth deeper, his eyes shadowed. Jonathan Pierce, the man who once strode boardrooms with the certainty of a king, now moved as if each step cost him dearly. He reached the lectern, gripped it with both hands. His voice, when it came, was lower than anyone expected, stripped of arrogance. "I denied him," he began. "I denied my own flesh and blood, because I was afraid of losing my fortune, afraid of losing my place, afraid of losing face in front of men who value image more than humanity." The cameras whirred. The silence thickened. Jonathan inhaled, then forced the words out like stones he had carried too long. "But when I looked into his eyes, those violet eyes that carry the mark of my family, I realized something far worse. In denying him, I was losing more than reputation. I was losing my honor, my humanity, my soul." He faltered. For a moment it seemed he might collapse. But then he straightened, his voice trembling yet clear. "Yes, Isaiah is my son. And to the mother of my child, Maria Johnson, I owe an apology no amount of money could ever purchase. I wronged her with cruelty, I wronged him with silence, and I wronged myself with cowardice. Today I confess all." The room exploded. Shouts from reporters, flashes firing in a storm. Yet amid the chaos, Jonathan lowered his head, as if bowing not to the press but to a truth he could no longer escape. Maria Johnson was not in the room. She had refused invitations, refused interviews, refused to let herself or Isaiah be paraded as spectacle. In her small apartment across the city, she watched on a battered television, Isaiah curled against her side. The boy's violet eyes widened at the sight of the man who looked so much like him. Maria did not smile. She did not cry victory. Her arms only tightened around Isaiah as she whispered, "You are seen now, my son, not as a rumor, not as a mistake, but as a person." Later, when Jonathan tried to reach her by phone, she met his overtures with calm firmness. When he asked to meet, she allowed it, but only on her terms. He arrived at her apartment weeks later, stripped of office, stripped of the CEO title, his fortune fractured, his reputation scorched. The board had moved swiftly, ousting him. The merger collapsed. Magazines that once crowned him dealmaker of the century now printed headlines like "Pierce Dynasty in Ruins." He knocked at her door not as a mogul, but as a man hollowed by loss. Maria answered with Isaiah balanced on her hip. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes simple. Yet in her posture there was strength greater than any empire he had built. "I don't want your money," she said before he could speak. "I never did. And Isaiah is not a tool for you to buy redemption. If you want to be in his life, it will not be as a billionaire seeking absolution. It will be as a father who learns to show up." Jonathan nodded, his throat tight. "Then teach me," he whispered. "Teach me how." So began the slowest work of his life. He sat awkwardly on the floor of Mariah's apartment, fumbling as Isaiah thrust toy cars into his hands. He stumbled through bedtime stories, his voice unsure, until Isaiah's laughter coaxed warmth into his tone. He walked the boy to school, enduring the curious stares of neighbors who recognized him from the news. Piece by piece, Jonathan tried to become the father he had refused to be. Maria did not make it easy. She remained fiercely independent, continuing her work, refusing his offers of comfort bought by money. But in small ways, she allowed space for Isaiah to know his father, space for Jonathan to discover the difference between status and love. Months later, in a sunlit park, Isaiah ran through the grass, his eyes catching the afternoon light like twin shards of amethyst. His laughter rang out, free, unburdened. Maria stood a few steps away, arms crossed but face softened. Jonathan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching his son with something like wonder. For the first time there was no hatred between them, no battle of denial and proof. There was only a child, alive and whole, and two adults forced by him to grow into better versions of themselves. Maria spoke quietly, not turning her head. "Do you see? He is not here for you to fix your legacy. He is here to live his life. If you can remember that, you may yet be the father he deserves." Jonathan swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the boy chasing butterflies. "Then let me try," he said. And for once, Maria gave no answer, only silence, which in that moment was permission enough. Jonathan Pierce lost his empire, his board seat, and the fortune he once worshipped. But he gained something rarer, the chance, however fragile, to reclaim his humanity. His name in the papers was no longer gilded with triumph, but occasionally, a photograph would surface. Jonathan kneeling beside a small boy with violet eyes, their hands tangled around a soccer ball, both smiling as though the rest of the world had fallen away. For Maria Johnson, the journey was different. She remained rooted in her independence, her dignity intact. The community that once whispered Maid and scandal now spoke of her with respect. She had not chased wealth, yet she had safeguarded something priceless, the truth of her child. And Isaiah, the boy once threatened with erasure, now grew in the light of recognition. He was not a rumor, not a shadow, not a bargaining chip. He was himself. The world had seen what power tried to bury. That dignity does not belong to billionaires or boardrooms. It belongs to those who refuse to be silenced. And in the end, it was not Jonathan's wealth that told the story, but Isaiah's eyes, violet and unyielding, carrying the quiet victory of truth.
Message.
In the end, this story is not just about wealth or scandal. It is about the quiet strength of a mother who refused to let her child be erased, and the piercing truth carried in a pair of violet eyes. Jonathan Pierce lost his empire, but what he gained was far more costly, the realization that dignity cannot be bought and fatherhood cannot be forged with money alone. Maria Johnson showed us that resilience can outlast power, and that love, unyielding, uncompromised, can force even the most ruthless to reckon with their humanity. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. Empires crumble, reputations fade, but the truth of who we are and how we love remains the only legacy worth leaving.